Welcome to Watch, Review, Repeat. This is the podcast where two best friends discuss the latest in film and television, and then we do it all over again the following week. My name is Colton Brown. Joining me today is Andrew Meadows. Andrew, how have you been since last week?
I've been busy. Been doing lots of things. First and foremost, I would like to thank everybody for listening. I thought I was thoroughly surprised by the amount of people that commented and called me with advice and posted online, and it was just a overwhelmingly positive reaction to a little thing that I didn't think anybody would actually, to be frank, would listen to. So I was thoroughly floored, and I'm super stoked, and it's made me want to go out and watch some movies, man.
Yeah, I'll have to echo that sentiment. I've also been pretty thrilled with the response we've gotten. I've talked to a few people that have, left feedback or just said that they listened to it, and honestly, it is gratifying to know that we're at least reaching some people. Some people are paying attention, and it's definitely made me a lot more motivated to come back for episode 2 right now and get back into the swing of things. So this week we're talking about the Marvel Netflix television shows. So we'll be talking about Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, and Iron Fist.
And this is kind of to invigorate any interest in these 4 shows. If you haven't already seen them, in preparation for The Defenders, which I think it's a fair statement to say that that's like a Netflix series equivalent to Marvel's Avengers.
Absolutely. It's the culmination of all these characters' journeys coming together. So we'll get into that much more extensively in a little while. We're going to start off with some news from the past week. And we're going to start with some familiar territory. We're going to talk about Deadpool 2 yet again. So this week, we got a reveal from Ryan Reynolds on Twitter of Josh Brolin as Cable.
And he looks like a badass.
Yes, he does. So Cable, for those who aren't aware, is a time traveler. He's infected with this techno virus that's kind of taken over. So you can kind of see in the picture, he's got this metal arm. He's got some cybernetic enhancements to his eyes, and
it looks like he's seen some shit. That is for sure.
Yeah. Well, when you come from a future where some shit has gone down, that's probably par for the course.
That's what you've seen.
We talked briefly about Deadpool 2 last week, and we talked kind of a lot about how, we're excited for Fox to kind of let filmmakers really kind of take these characters and run with them. And I think that this is yet another example of them really kind of letting them do their own thing. And I'm excited about this. And Josh Brolin, I think, is actually a pretty inspired pick for this. Josh Brolin will also be appearing in the next 2 Avengers films as Thanos, who's kind of been the big bad that they've been hyping up and building up for years to this point. He's not really a guy I really ever considered for someone like Cable, but he's a perfect choice, and if this picture is any indication, I think he's going to crush it.
Oh, and he crushes it in all the movies. I mean, he's a great actor. He's a very established actor. He was in Sicario. He did great in Sicario.
Yeah, Sicario is fantastic. And going back to Josh Brolin, he also found himself in the airwaves this week. So I guess he got into a little bit of an incident with James Cameron, the famous director of Terminator 1, Terminator 2, Aliens, most recently Avatar.
Titanic is a good one. That's a pretty big one.
Yeah, that's a big one. It made a little bit of money at the box office. A few people saw it, I think.
Right. For the 9 months it was in theaters.
Yeah, the 9 months it was in theaters, and the 15 weeks that it was at number 1 or whatever ridiculous streak it ran off. Clearly nothing else came out in that span. So what happened here with Josh Brolin and James Cameron is, I guess, apparently James Cameron approached Josh Brolin to appear in his Avatar sequels. So Avatar is getting not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 sequels.
Oh my gosh.
Which, Avatar made a lot of money. So
why not?
I guess so. James Cameron, he's kind of a madman, but he does know what he's doing, and he's proven that basically with every film he's put out. But he approached Josh Brolin for this role in a sequel. It didn't describe the role or anything, but Josh Brolin turned it down. So Josh Brolin in an interview said, James Cameron's fucking calling me this name and that name.
Who turns James Cameron down, man?
I don't know.
Who is Josh Brolin to turn James Cameron down?
Well, it's like he said, he knows what he's doing, so I don't know. But so these Avatar sequels, we're actually getting a little bit more details on that. So I mentioned that he's doing 4 sequels. What I did not mention is that he's apparently trying to film them all consecutively.
No. How long would that take to film?
Well, let's say that a reasonable 2-hour movie on average takes probably 3 to 6 months to film, kind of depending on the scope. Obviously, something that's a little bit more independent, low budget can get away with a smaller shooting schedule. But, something like Avatar, it's a very computer-generated, intensive feature, something with a lot of effects work, just a lot that goes into the production of it.
That doesn't account for reshoots and things either. Right? I mean...
No, that's just principal photography.
So essentially you're taking these actors and actresses and just general staff and you're tying them up for what would be, a year? Maybe more? Not to say that you can't do multiple movies at once, but damn.
That kind of brings me to my question is, do you care? Do you want Avatar sequels? Is there an interest here? For you, for the general audience, what do you think?
The only thing that I remember from Avatar, I saw it once. And I remember that had a ridiculous amount, like this whole data farm. It took like a whole data farm to crunch all the information from this movie about the amount of CG that was put into it. And it was a huge endeavor. It was the first time anything like this has ever been done. But film-wise, the only thing that I remember about this movie is Stephen Lang kicking ass. He had a robot that had a knife, a giant Bowie knife. Which was ridiculous, and I remember Sam Worthington in Avatar form learning to ride whatever pterodactyl looking thing that bird thing was. You know what I mean? It had cool things, and it was visually pleasing. It was a good looking movie, but I don't necessarily think it warrants 4 successive sequels. You know what I mean?
Nah, I definitely know what you mean. So let me bounce this off you to see if this will maybe change your perspective on this. So James Cameron just recently talked about kind of his ideas for these sequels, and he says the interesting conceit of the Avatar sequels is it's pretty much the same characters. There's going to be new characters, a lot of new settings and creatures, but he's taking characters we know, putting them in unfamiliar places, and taking them on this greater journey. And he said there's not going to be a new villain every time, which is interesting. It's going to be the same guy, same motherfucker through all 4 movies.
Stephen Lang.
Stephen Lang's coming back. Now,
all right.
This is some mild Avatar spoilers for a movie that came out a few years ago. I think the embargo has been lifted. The spoiler embargo has been lifted on Avatar. So his character died at the end of this movie. Now, I would forgive anyone for not remembering that because, like I said, for a movie that made very nearly $3 billion worldwide, it's a beautiful technological achievement, but it was a pretty samey kind of story.
Just to fill everybody in, Stephen Lang was in Don't Breathe. He was the blind man in Don't Breathe. He was the general in The Men Who Stare at Goats. He was in that movie, it's one of my favorite movies. Is The Men Who Stare at Goats. It's a great movie. If you haven't seen it, go see it. It's good, or buy it, or rent it, or stream it, or however you can watch it. That's a good one. But no, yeah, I mean, he got jacked for that movie, and he was everywhere. He was kicking ass in a giant robot with a giant Bowie knife, which is cool. Who doesn't want to see some jacked dude in a Bowie knife wielding robot? That's cool. But if he's coming back for 4 movies, I'll probably watch it for Stephen Lang because I'm not going to watch it for Sam Worthington, that's for sure. And I don't blame Sam Worthington for saying, "Hey, I'll sign up for that. I'll play Jake Sully in 4 movies for a year."
Well, what else is he doing these days?
I tell you one movie he was in. He was in Terminator Salvation. Terminator Salvation rocks my socks, man. It's a good movie.
Terminator Salvation is actually not the worst Terminator movie made. That honor goes to 2015's Terminator Genesis.
I'd agree with you. Man, Terminator.
So Terminator, that's kind of a franchise that's fallen off the wayside. Now, I briefly mentioned it as something that James Cameron himself was involved in for Terminator 1 and 2. At that point, it kind of went into other hands, kind of took on a different sort of life. I would argue a much worse sort of life. But we're getting a Terminator 6, apparently. Tim Miller, director of the first Deadpool, is taking the reins for this one, but James Cameron is reported to have some involvement behind the scenes in this. So
let me ask you this: Is this Tim Miller? Is this a reinvention of the franchise? Is it a reboot or what?
So I guess the conceit for this one is they're possibly going to explore why the original Terminator T-800 model is based off of someone that looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Okay.
Which I suppose is a fair question. I just don't know that it's something that really would make for a compelling film or something I need to watch.
Well, let me ask you this. If I were to make some sort of crazy, just a crazy invincible robot, right? Meant for killing people, okay? For delivering judgment, okay? If I were to mold this robot after somebody, I would have to mold it after a badass, right?
Yes and no, because we see in some of like the Terminator bits, and they have the future segments where you see it's just the plain old endoskeletons, metal endoskeleton, where they just very clearly robots carrying around these laser rifles and destroying people. I think the whole idea behind the actual T-800 models of giving them the skin is infiltration purposes. So it's one of those things where, does someone that looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger, is he someone that is inconspicuous?
I don't think there's anything inconspicuous about a naked Arnold Schwarzenegger walking into a bar and asking for clothes. That's the complete opposite of inconspicuous.
Now, to be fair, I don't know that anyone else naked in that scenario would be much better. But yeah, it's one of those things where this could be something that could be interesting. I feel like the Terminator franchise has almost run its course.
I would take a reinvention of the Terminator franchise. I would take a retelling of the original story.
I don't know. I guess it's just one of those things where
just drop it and leave it. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Sometimes I just don't know that it's worthwhile. And I understand, Hollywood, it's a business. It's about making money and taking established franchises and really kind of trying to use that to capture attention. I mean, something that's labeled Terminator 6 or Terminator something subtitle, yeah, it's probably going to make more money than some original time-traveling movie with robots from the future. It makes sense. I mean, we've had tons of remakes, tons of reboots. It's a business, and that's what it boils down to. It boils down to making money, and something like that, slapping a franchise name on it, well, hopefully it makes you a little bit more money, and I can understand from that perspective why they'd not want to let go of that. But from, I guess, an audience perspective, it's kind of just like, well, if you're going to do it, let's get it right. And when you've basically bungled it 3 times in a row, it starts to make you a little bit worried going forward.
Is there any casting news on the movie, or do we just know the director?
Arnold's coming back.
Well, that's a given, right? If the whole movie's about why it looks like Arnold should be there. Are they going to they should probably do a little Hollywood magic, make him look young again? Do a little Grand Moff Tarkin action on him? That'd be he's not dead, so
he's not dead yet. That's correct.
How about a little bit of Tron action? That's probably more applicable.
Well, hopefully the technology is a little bit better. It is. We've seen the de-aging technology used pretty extensively in a lot of the Marvel movies. We've seen Michael Douglas get the de-aging treatment in Ant-Man. Robert Downey Jr. got it in Captain America: Civil War. They've been working on this technology to make people look young again, and doing it in a fairly convincing fashion versus something like Tron Legacy, which kind of came out, I think, before that technology had really kind of hit the benchmark that it needed to be used in a full-fledged feature the way it was.
I would also like to point out that Star Wars and George Lucas is responsible for all of those technologies. With the invention of mocap and the incorporation of industrial lights and magic. That was groundbreaking stuff right there. And I'm going to take this as a point to segue to the latest Star Wars news, which Entertainment Weekly recently released a bunch of pictures and short little snippets of information about those pictures. We got a couple of new aliens from Star Wars. We got some cute porgs, which are like they look almost like hamsters with crazy big eyes.
They're like penguin hamster things.
Yeah, they look pretty cute though. They look pretty cool.
I suspect we'll see a lot of merchandise featuring these little guys.
For sure. We also have some a new group of aliens called caretakers. They live on the planet. They apparently they live on Act 2, which is the planet that they found Luke Skywalker on at the end of The Force Awakens. And apparently they're responsible for the upkeep of the structures on that planet. And they kind of look like they're described as fish bird people. And it was also recently announced that Andy Serkis's Supreme Leader Snoke would be completely CGI. So
as he was in The Force Awakens.
Which I think we're at a point in CGI now where if you want to make a character CGI, especially some screwed up looking alien guy, I think we can get away with it. I don't have a problem with that, especially since Andy Serkis has taken the role. He's obviously proved himself with the ability to capture full range of emotion through mocap.
I talked about War for the Planet of the Apes last week, and Andy Serkis is an absolute pioneer as far as the motion capture acting business is concerned. So
yeah, for sure, he's great.
If there's anyone that can elevate a CGI character, it's going to be Andy Serkis. So I don't have any problems with that. Star Wars itself is very familiar with using fully CG characters to varying levels of success. I would agree. I think the prequels probably got a little too crazy with it. The technology, again, probably wasn't quite ready at the time, but Lucas was a director that really he pushes technology to the forefront, so I can understand why he made the decisions he did to utilize some fully CG characters. But, even Force Awakens, we got Maz Kanata, who was fully CG rendered and using the motion capture technology.
Her character, full disclosure, that scene where Rey gets her hands on that lightsaber and Maz comes in there and talks to her, it made me cry, I think, the first 2, maybe 3 times I watched that movie. It was, so good. That character, just everything about that scene was fantastic. I'm really excited to see where they take Star Wars in the next movie.
Yeah, absolutely. So, director Rian Johnson, who is probably most famous for his work on Breaking Bad. He also worked on the movie Brick, the movie Looper, and he's a guy that I feel is a very inspired choice for Star Wars, because he's a guy that I don't think is going to be afraid to push the boundaries and maybe break out of the sameness that I think The Force Awakens suffered from. And I love The Force Awakens, so I'll fully admit to that. But it did very safely play within the limits and constraints and the tropes that we've already seen in Star Wars. So my hope is that with Last Jedi, we'll really kind of use that as a launching point and then just go nuts with it. So,
and I have to say, even if they continue to mimic the those tropes, I think Rian Johnson has enough flair within his own movies and just his own artistic vision to really make a significant impact on the story, especially making a story worth telling. We went to Star Wars Celebration, and he was at the press conference. He actually showed up in the middle of the night when we were sleeping on the floor.
He did.
Signing autographs.
We were too dumb to go over and say hi to him and get an autograph from him. But to be fair, we were also trying to sleep on a very hard concrete floor that we were very ill prepared for. So it wasn't exactly an ideal circumstance.
No, but do you remember the panel when he was showing the behind the scenes pictures? This guy takes a Polaroid camera or some sort of old analog camera on set every day, and it doesn't matter the movie, and he goes and he takes just candid pictures of the set, of the actors and actresses, and they're fantastic pictures. They're very good. They're very well taken. And he's just a very creative guy. And I'm excited to see where he takes the franchise, because I think, like I said, I think he tells stories in a way, even if they follow the same tropes, they'll be presented in the correct way, or an entertaining way, to where we have somebody who fully understands the franchise, the characters within it, and can throw enough creative juices in there to make it to make it a outstanding movie. You know what I mean? Something that shines amongst the bunch of Star Wars stuff. So I'm really excited to see where it goes. And they also released they released a picture of the guards, Snoke's guards too.
So yeah, these are the Praetorian Guards. They're very obviously a riff on the Imperial Royal Guards that Emperor Palpatine had in the original trilogy. They're, fully garbed in red cloaks. So these guys look a little bit more armored. They still got the red color scheme, but they've got very cool looking armor, very
samurai-esque.
Absolutely very samurai inspired. And I believe I saw something that Rian Johnson had mentioned that, he was always disappointed that he never really got to see those Royal Guards in the original trilogy kick into action and really do anything. And so that's something he wanted to make these Praetorian Guards do, is he really wanted to see these guys kick some ass and,
cool.
earn their paychecks that they're getting from the First Order. So yeah, I'm excited about that. I mean, Last Jedi is right around the corner. It comes out in December of this year, so we really don't have long to wait.
Yeah.
We'll probably get at least the new trailer, I would say, within the next couple months. So, it's about time to Disney to start kicking that marketing into gear,
yes.
And I think this is probably going to be the start of it, all this Entertainment Weekly stuff that we just got. So there's 8 parts total. There's a lot more details if that's something that you are interested in investigating and kind of looking about. We'll kind of skip over the rest of that just because we'd be here all day if we were trying to discuss every little detail that they released about that. So
in more comic book movie news, Netflix recently acquired Millarworld, which Millarworld is the creative minds that wrote Kick-Ass.
Kick-Ass, Kingsman.
Yep, and Wanted. Which I think probably... Well, Kick-Ass was pretty awesome. But Kingsman, I really, really enjoyed Kingsman. I'm excited for Kingsman too. So, I mean, I don't know anything about any other books. Do you know anything about these other books they have out?
I'm not really familiar with this, to be honest. I've heard varying things about this. I think it's an interesting thing. I mean, kind of the general sentiment I seem to get and what I seem to gather with a lot of Mark Millar properties is that a lot of the time his ideas are good, but the execution falters a little bit. And so I think when we talk about something like Kick-Ass and Kingsman in terms of their movie adaptations, if you compared them to their source material, they're quite a bit different.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. I mean, Kick-Ass is a much more, well, it's rated R for the movie, but it's a much more over the top, even more R-rated in the comics. And I think they had to pull back with a lot of that. So, this is something that I feel like there's, based on what I've seen with Millar's work, there's general ideas at play that could be interesting if executed well. So Netflix, seems to be just throwing money at everything these days, and some of it works, some of it doesn't. We'll kind of talk a little bit about that in a little while with their deal with Marvel. So I'm willing to give them the benefit of doubt on this and see what a lot of these pan out to, see how they turn out. Like I said, I don't have a lot of familiarity with them, so if they make changes, I'm fine with it. It doesn't bother me one bit. And I guess we'll kind of see the product of this, probably not anytime this year, but probably starting next year, we'll probably see some more announcements.
Speaking of streaming things, Disney is pulling out of Netflix, and they want to have their own streaming service, which is just it's just a big pain in the ass.
It is. It seems like every company has their own streaming service or is starting their own streaming service, and it's getting to the point where, cable's dying a slow death, but
you need to pay $15 for every subscription service.
Say we're going to, what we're paying for cable now, we're going to be paying for if we want to access all this content that's going to be spread between 15, 20 different service providers. And it's just like, all right, so we're getting rid of one cancer and replacing it with another.
Yeah, welcome to a la carte. Now, apparently, Netflix is in talks to try to keep the Star Wars franchise. I think that's what I read. Did you read that?
I saw something about that. I've also seen that Disney is possibly playing with the idea of doing a separate streaming service for Marvel, Star Wars. So, more money.
Oh, no. Really? So, listen, the moral of this story is have a much better experience with your AV experience and purchase physical media. And that's the moral of the story. Have a collection of movies. The quality is much better. There's no compression on your video. There's no compression on your audio. And everything looks and sounds just tremendously better as a result of that. And you don't have a cycling of movies. You don't have to worry about movies getting pulled away. You don't have to worry about subscribing to other services every month. You don't have to worry about any of that. Just buy your movies. Keep them at your home and watch them whenever you want.
Well, let's say you don't have to convince me. I have a very extensive bookcase full of many, many Blu-rays. So, I agree. I don't think there's any comparison with Blu-ray and now 4K. I mean, the quality is unparalleled, even with the advances we've had in streaming technologies. I mean, they're getting there. They're definitely getting there. It's a far cry from what it used to be. But I like the comfort of having content available to me when I want to watch it, when I can just pop it in. And I understand the convenience of a lot of these streaming services. And, I'm on board. I use Netflix. I use Hulu. I use Amazon Video. And I definitely subscribe to a lot of these streaming providers. But I typically do it for the content. I don't do it because of the convenience. But I understand. So we've been talking a lot about Netflix, streaming services, that sort of thing. So I think it's about time we really get into the main content for this episode, which is the Marvel Netflix shows. So back in 2013, and bear in mind, this is kind of before Netflix had really kind of taken on the reputation that it's come to have these days. You look at Netflix now and it's inundated with Netflix original series. I mean, this is really kind of where it all started. Marvel announces 60 episodes of content. So there's 13 episodes of 4 different shows, plus an 8-episode miniseries that teams up all these shows that they're going to have. So the 4 shows that they announced were Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, and Iron Fist. At the time that they announced this was very much kind of like a, wow, holy shit.
And for anybody to get it, I mean, CBS could have had it. Anybody else could have had it, but they gave it to a streaming service. And I think it kind of changed the mold for making a streaming service a relevant platform for original content, right? Because before Netflix had something like Daredevil, Hulu didn't have anything. They were a platform for streaming live television stuff, right? Now, I feel like after Daredevil was announced and Marvel started investing in that platform, I feel like these other platforms, and in order to stay relevant and compete, they need to invest in their own original content. I think it kind of changed the mold of what these streaming services actually offer.
Absolutely. I mean, Marvel, they raised the bar. Marvel and Netflix, and both of them. This team up here, I mean, really kind of set the stage for absolutely what the market has become today. And for good reason, I would argue. Daredevil Season 1 comes out April 2015. So Daredevil, just for those who are unaware, it's a comic book show. It's about a blind lawyer. He likes to lawyer during the daytime, and then at nighttime, he likes to go beat up people.
And I think his premise is there's solace in the law, right? But the system can only get you so far, and sometimes, the majority of the times, in fact, it's broken, and you have to exceed the limits of the law in order for justice to get served, right?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, that's Daredevil, or as he's known, Matthew Murdock. That's very much his perspective, and it's a fascinating character. I love the character of Daredevil.
No, but it's the whole premise of the character. He's constantly on this struggle with what's right and what's wrong, and what kind of boundaries do I need to set for myself, and am I crossing these boundaries? You know what I mean? It's a constant internal struggle with the actual character, and it's very compelling, especially when it's told the correct way. It's compelling. It's good. It's something that I think we all probably think about, but Matt Murdock is almost the personification of that struggle. What's right and what's wrong, and what kind of limits do we set upon ourselves whenever we talk about, law and order and those sort of things,
Sure. Just generally speaking, Daredevil season 1, what are your kind of overall thoughts on it?
Daredevil season 1, I thought it represented a lot. I thought it brought a compelling character to a fresh new space. I thought it was acted well. Karen Page did a really good job, or Deborah Wool. She did a good job as Karen Page. The relationship between Matt Murdock and his assistant, Foggy, played by Eldon Henson. I thought that relationship was good and spontaneous, and it felt fresh and it felt fun. I thought in Vincent D'Onofrio was awesome as Wilson Fisk. I thought he was perfect. And I think this is consistent with a lot of Netflix original series Marvel movies or shows. The villains, for the most part, are very compelling. I think the villains are great.
I 100% agree with you. I mean, that is absolutely where a lot of these shows shine. And when we start talking a little bit more about the individual shows, we'll have a little bit better opportunity to kind of explore how that's the case. I would say why that's the case is, I mean, this is the perfect medium for telling long-form stories. I mean, you think about movies, you've got 2 to 2.5 hours to really tell a compelling story, and it has to be tightly plotted. A lot of the times, especially in the case of, you think about something like Iron Man, you think about Captain America, the first one, a lot of these firsts, you've got 2 hours to tell a story, and of course you're going to dedicate most of that time to your protagonist.
Right. And I think that's kind of where where comic book movies kind of falter, because in many ways you're trying to tell two people's stories, right? You want to make both characters relevant. You need to make the antagonist, you need to make him just as compelling as the protagonist. You know what I mean? And a lot of times they falter in that medium of a movie. Whereas you can really expand on a lot of different things, on a 13 episode arc. You know what I mean? There's a lot more time to flesh out all the dimensions of all the characters, So, and they do a very good job the majority of the time, within these 4 different shows. I did think that the first season of Daredevil, and I've seen the season 1 time. I haven't rewatched it for this episode. If I remember correctly, I thought it started to wobble or falter in the middle, and then it really drove it home at the end, where that certainly wasn't the case. And I didn't think that was necessarily the full case of they changed the structure of the season for season 2, and I appreciated the change in pace for the second season. But season 1 was solid. It's definitely worth watching. I've seen all the shows that Netflix has put out for these characters, and I think they're all very much worth watching at least once. And
you did mention it, that you hadn't rewatched it, and I guess it's probably worth pointing out to our listeners that there's 5 seasons worth of content here. Now we've both watched these when they came out. I've watched Daredevil season 1 a couple times. Most recently was a few months ago. It wasn't feasible for us to sit down and watch all these shows again to get a fresher take on this. But that said, from what I do know of Daredevil season 1 and what I enjoy about this, what I enjoy about not just Daredevil and I guess really all these Netflix Marvel shows that they have, is that they explore a very different corner of the Marvel universe. I mean, the movies are very much about these world/cosmic level threats, and Daredevil is a character that, he's just trying to protect his neighborhood. Hell's Kitchen is that's his territory.
It's much more grounded.
It is. Season 1 especially, I think, really is much more grounded. I mean, Daredevil, he has heightened senses, so in a way he has kind of superpowers, but he's, I would say, probably the most vulnerable character, Marvel character that we've really seen adapted.
And that's very much apparent throughout season 1.
Think about this. I mean, this is a minor spoiler, but I mean, this dude gets his ass kicked up and down the entirety of season 1. I mean, he gets beat to hell. He gets cut up, battered and bruised. He gets left in a dumpster. This is a guy that takes his punches, but he deals them out, in spades too. And I think it's refreshing.
It is refreshing. He's also got his own personal nurse, if you will, Claire Temple.
Played by Rosario Dawson.
Yeah. And she does an excellent job, but I mean, just drive home the fact that he's a grounded character. I mean, he gets, like you said, he gets his ass handed to him, and he gets left in a dumpster, and Claire comes up and picks him up and puts him back together. And I mean, to the point where out of all of the characters that are going to be in the Defenders, he's the only character that requires a suit. And I think that says a lot, and he's definitely, like I said, he's a very relatable character, which probably makes him the most compelling character out of the entire Netflix series of heroes.
Yeah, and I also think that this is the first character that we get introduced to as an audience, and so by the same token that someone like Iron Man, Tony Stark, has very much been an anchor character for the cinematic universe, Daredevil kind of fills that role here.
Oh yeah, I never drew that parallel. Yeah,
not that those characters are really similar in any other way, but this is our introduction.
He's more of the human in a superhuman environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's much more of a character that the audience can really relate to and really understand.
He's the only one that has a job.
This is true. He's not very good at it, to be fair. No. Well, to say, he might be good at it. He just doesn't.
He doesn't make a lot of money.
He doesn't do it as often as he probably should. But this season for me, it's awesome. I think it's fairly well paced. You mentioned it kind of drags in the middle, and I guess I kind of agree to an extent, but it very much frames this as a hero versus villain setting, the villain being the Kingpin, Wilson Fisk, played by Vincent D'Onofrio. And this 13 episodes really does a great job, I feel, of not only establishing these characters. The protagonist, is very well established. We see an origin story, we really see kind of the way he feels, and why he does what he does. But it also does that for the villain. It almost makes a villain who does some pretty heinous things in the course of the series very sympathetic. And not that it makes you necessarily want to root for him, but it does kind of make you sit back and think, oh no, I kind of get why he is the way he is. I get why he's doing the things that he's doing.
Which it's the only villain it's the only villain I can really think of that has that sort of sympathy in all the Marvel movies. I can't think of any Marvel movie that has a villain he's that relatable.
No, and I think that's a strength of the medium, and I think that, not to excuse the movies for having lackluster villains, because I think it's not that you can't have great villains in movies, but it's something that Marvel has not really seemed to focus their efforts on very heavily, and it kind of shows. And here it really seemed like they made a deliberate effort to say, you know what, we want to see why Wilson Fisk is the person that he is.
And it's a stark contrast between characters too. Wilson Fisk plays a very powerful rich person in Hell's Kitchen, and he's buying up property. And Matt Murdock is a pro bono criminal defense lawyer. So they barely open up their own practice. Him and Foggy, you know what I mean, and their practice is just based on the principle that these people need help in a world that doesn't want to help these people. You know what I mean? So we're going to do what we need to do. And that's a struggle that that's a struggle that Foggy deals with on a constant basis. Matt Murdock is pretty much very anchored in his beliefs, whereas Foggy is he struggles with that. Hey, listen, I can go get a job over here at this huge firm.
I agree. I think this is something that is worth mentioning. Is Daredevil is kind of one of the few characters that we've really seen adapted that is very much rooted in his Catholicism. Daredevil is, he's very much working through his Catholic guilt. He's a guy that uses his faith to kind of justify why he's doing it, but at the same time limit himself. He's a guy that, he's got that Batman no-kill rule because that's the one thing that crosses the line for him.
And there's a whole arc devoted to that devotion in season 2. And that arc is probably, I would say, the best arc in comic. I can't think of a better arc in any comic book movie or show. You know what I'm saying? That's where season 2's got a super high point for me.
Yeah. So I guess we'll briefly touch on some season 1 spoilers here. So I'm going to go ahead and drop our spoiler warning for Daredevil season 1. I think that this show really shines in the fight sequences, and I think that's kind of what elevates it for me, especially episode 2. We've got this hallway fight, and the way that it's shot, it's basically, the camera basically stays at the back of the hallway. There's like these 4 doors on either side where, there's a couple goons on like each room, and you see Daredevil coming in and out of them and just beating the shit out of these guys. And it's shot in this one take, and this one was actually done in a legitimate one take. There's a couple tricks to the editing where a stuntman will occasionally come back into the main view of the camera, and then when he disappears into another room, a different stuntman, or Charlie Cox, who plays Matt Murdock, will come out and kind of take that spot. But it's so seamless, and it's such a brutal, visceral scene, and
it does an excellent job of grounding the character once again, because at the end of this incredible one shot, he's fallen on the wall in exhaustion. I mean, dude's super tired.
They say he's still fighting these guys, and he's literally taking 2 seconds to lean against the wall and, catch his breath. I mean, you can see him. He's just visibly very exhausted, and like that's such a fantastic sequence.
That and the scene where Wilson Fisk crushes that guy's head in the door. I remember that pretty clearly.
Yeah, that was pretty violent. Yeah, he just decapitates him. This show is brutal. Like it's very much a step up in terms of violence, in terms of really kind of from what we see in the movies. I think the showrunner for season 1, Stephen S. the Knight, who was the creator, showrunner of the Spartacus series on Starz, he said that he kind of described this as a PG-16. Which obviously it's not a real rating, obviously, but it's somewhere between PG-13 and R. And I think that for something like Daredevil, like that sort of gritty, grounded, violent tone is absolutely perfect for the character. I mean, you think about his history in the comic books. Frank Miller, who worked on a bunch of things. I guess Sin City.
Dark Knight Returns,
absolutely. In the 1980s, he kind of took over the character and really reinvented him and turned him into this character that, I mean, basically what we see on the screen in season 1 is what Frank Miller. Yeah, I mean, that's Frank Miller's iteration to a T. Especially The Man Without Fear, which was kind of a standalone origin story. Where he kind of, I mean, it's a retelling of his origin story where, Frank Miller kind of made his own modifications to it to kind of better fit the character that he had crafted within the mainline comics. And like just this tone and what Miller really kind of created for Daredevil, like it's such a, for me, a perfect execution of what he wrote on the page and translating that in a way that, it's not 100% beholden to everything he wrote. It takes inspiration from various iterations of Daredevil. Probably most notably Brian Michael Bendis and Alex Maleev. They worked on, I think, the early 2000s, the Marvel Knights version of Daredevil. But I mean, just the aesthetics of this show, the feel of the show, it's all very much inspired by Frank Miller, Bendis, Maleev, and I love Daredevil. I don't know if you can tell. Like this, I love this character. I mean, it's one of my favorite Marvel characters ever, and it makes me so happy that this show turned out as good as it did. So it's awesome. I think you mentioned D'Onofrio as Kingpin / Wilson Fisk, and
so good, right?
He's so good. He's so good.
And I tell you, somebody that we haven't mentioned yet is Ben Urich.
Yeah, man. Vondi Curtis Hall absolutely crushed it as Ben Urich. He takes on this mentor role for Karen Page, who I agree, I really enjoy Deborah Ann Woll in this.
And Karen Page and him had an excellent relationship between those two characters.
I mean, you mentioned Ben, you mentioned Karen, you mentioned Foggy. I mean, like all these sporting characters are just so well done and well acted and well written. I guess, Sam, I just this show for me.
In the overall arc between the two seasons, I feel like they're a significant step above the rest of the Netflix series of characters, and I don't think that's because we have a natural lean towards Daredevil, but the characters are just so much more compelling, and it's made in such a better way, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. So, is there anything else you want to touch on in season 1 before we kind of get a little bit more in depth with season 2?
No, I'm ready to talk about season 2.
All right, I can tell you, you've been bringing it up 3 times, and I'm like, I want to talk about season 1. I want to talk about season 1. Let's pull it back a little bit.
I'm ready to talk about season 2.
All right, season 2. Tell me everything about season 2.
Okay. Season 2 did an interesting take on just the arcs that they're pulling. So Season 1 very much had one singular arc with a couple of smaller arcs in between the supporting characters. But what Season 2 did was, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, like I said, it's been a little while, but Season 2 split it up into, I believe, 2 major arcs. Is that right?
I would say it's probably closer to 3 major arcs.
Okay. So to be clear, the first arc, I think, is the most powerful thing that I've seen. This arc is very powerful. I think it was great, especially if you're invested in the character Matt Murdock. There ends up being a character. His name's Frank Castle, and Frank Castle's history is that his family was murdered at the hands of these criminals, right? And he is he used to be in the military and everything else. Now, he's a very strong contrast from Matt Murdock's belief, as in, you need to practice restraint. These people can change. You need to put them within the system of the law and let the law be the ultimate judge of these people, right? Where Frank Castle believes that these people commit crimes and they hurt other people, and I'm going to end them. So this character shoots people. He blows them up. And he offers a very different perspective on how things can get done. And the conflict that Matt Murdock and Frank Castle have is that Frank Castle doesn't think that Matt Murdock's getting anything done. And Frank Castle's played by John Bernthal, who was in, most notably, probably for everybody, is The Walking Dead. He played Shane in Season 1. Who was also a very violent, brutal character. And he really steps it up for Daredevil Season 2. He's super compelling as this character, right? He's just, he nails it. And he's sympathetic too. It does another very good job of creating a sympathetic character. And especially one that can be considered as a villain, right?
Well, he's certainly not a hero.
He's certainly, I guess the correct term would be anti-hero. So they took a shot straight out of the comic books, and to a T. And I haven't read a lot of these Daredevil comics. The character in general is very compelling.
Yeah. So this is actually, I think, what you're kind of alluding to. It's actually from a Punisher comic.
Yeah. This first arc had a crazy one shot, if I'm not mistaken, down a stairwell.
It did.
Is that right?
It did. I feel a little bit of deja vu talking about some stairwell one shots, because we kind of talked about one last week with Atomic Blonde.
Right?
Yeah. It's, it took the fight that I kind of talked about in Season 1, and it steps it up to 11.
The amount of vision that these people have for these scenes is just, it's like, they're just visionary people. You know what I mean? They can take what they want to do, and they just put it out, and it's great. They do a very good job. And what I thought the problem was in Season 1 of Daredevil, I felt that a portion of it was alleviated in Season 2. I didn't feel like it dragged a whole lot. The pacing was off because essentially you're almost starting a completely new arc, every time you want to implement a new idea. But as a whole, I thought that the content was better. Does that make sense?
Well, I think that was probably a pretty measured response to possibly the issues they ran into with Daredevil Season 1, and this is jumping ahead a little bit, but Jessica Jones as well. Daredevil Season 2 actually came out in March of 2016, which was after the first season of Jessica Jones was released. So I know, I agree. I think they made a very deliberate response of, let's do these arcs, and it's not dissimilar to what they do in comic books. Typically you get 5-6 issues in a comic book that is a self-contained arc, and then you move on from there and you do another self-contained arc. And it's not that they don't reference each other. Obviously what happens in arc 1 still happened, and it's still ever present in arc 2, but it's not the focus. And so I think that this one definitely took a different approach than Season 1. Season 1 was a very gradual build-up of, the Man in the Mask / Daredevil versus Wilson Fisk. And this one is very much, here's a cross section of what happens here. Then he moves on, and there's a cross section of what happens here. And then, by the time you get to the latter episodes, it's
everything's related.
All this shit's coming together, and this is what happens now. So, I think that segmented, arc approach was a great way to handle things, because I think it does alleviate a lot of the issues that I think that you find. With not just Daredevil, but with some of the other Netflix shows, is that the pacing needs a lot of work. I think Daredevil season 2 probably did the best job of really kind of making the 13 episodes work as well as they could by structuring it in the way that they did. That said, you kind of mentioned how the first arc was about Frank Castle and Daredevil and their conflict and how they really kind of respond to each other, and for me this 4-episode arc between those two is the high point of anything that Marvel and Netflix has done.
I didn't want to go as far to say that, but I'm kind of thinking it.
It is skipping ahead. Obviously we haven't talked about, we still haven't mentioned 3 other shows really in any sort of extensive detail, but
I would even say as far as the movies though, I can't think of don't get me wrong, there's really good Marvel movies, but as far as the relationship between two opposite-minded characters, almost, it's like I said, it's a powerful moment in the franchise, really. And when I think of Marvel Netflix shows, okay, if you say, hey, did you see this? Did you see any of these shows we're talking about? The first thing that I think of is the 4 episodes that happened in the beginning of season 2. And it's not to discredit the faults of season 2, but it is, it carries it through, man. It's good stuff.
And it's a testament, really, to Charlie Cox and John Bernthal, because those two are absolute perfection, not just in terms of kind of adapting the comical characters, but elevating what is already great written material. Those guys just absolutely sell the shit out of, what they're doing. Episode 4, John Bernthal has a monologue kind of talking about his past and kind of, what's happened to him, why he's the way he is. And he crushes it.
And the predicament that he puts Daredevil in, and like I said, it's just like I said, I don't know how to say it any other way, and I don't want to sound repetitive, but it's incredibly powerful.
It's not just, John Bernthal is Frank Castle is one new character that we get, but the other new character that we get, the other big character from the comic books that we get, and that I really want to talk about, is Elektra.
That's fair, yeah.
Elektra is she's Daredevil's poison. She's this figure from his past who is she's a bad influence on him, but you can kind of understand why he's, really kind of so attracted to her, and not just in terms of physicality or anything like that.
Because he's blind.
There are other ways to see.
Oh, there's other ways to see. Okay.
Just in terms of, Matt with his Catholic guilt kind of tiptoes around what is right, what is wrong, questions of morality.
And Elektra pushes that boundaries.
And Elektra is the literal personification of those boundaries. Absolutely. She's such a perfect, she's not really a foil to him necessarily, but she's the person that will push him, pull him.
And once again, we have another good person to ground Matt Murdock, where he struggled in the first portion of the season 2. He struggled with his boundaries. The second arc, it explores the relationship between Elektra and Matt Murdock, in the sense that why he has the boundaries he has, why he keeps her, at arm's distance away, and at the same time why he struggles with the relationship that they have. They have a very unique relationship. Yeah,
and it's a toxic relationship, but she does bring out certain elements of him that potentially could be for good, and she also kind of brings out the worst in him. And as we've seen Matt up until the point that he really Elektra kind of reintroduces herself into his life, we've kind of seen him have a pretty good grasp on things. But by the time that Elektra kind of introduces herself, I mean, Matt basically totally loses, he totally loses himself. He really does.
Especially after the conversation that Frank Castle had with him.
Yeah, I mean, Matt just kind of plunges into this. Oh, well, Matt Murdock's not important. I'm Daredevil, and it's kind of this. He forgets to balance his personal life with his alter ego here, and he very much kind of neglects his personal life. The first few episodes, he develops a relationship with Karen, and then Elektra comes into his life, and he just basically pushes her away and says, you're not important like I thought. And he plunges into this rabbit hole of really kind of diving into this Daredevil persona and, basically taking on all the problems of the world at once and thinking that he has the ability to really kind of, stop everything himself. The writing is occasionally a little sloppy here and there, just in terms of the plotting. But as far as grounding Matt's struggle and everything like that, I think it does a really good job.
And when season 2 hits you, it hits you hard. There's low points, yes, but I feel like the high points in the series, the series, I guess, but just the season, when it hits home hard. It hits you. I mean, like I said, it just does a very good job. The high points are very high, and the low points are right there, kind of in the middle. You know what I mean? It never really gets real bad, but at the same, but the high points are just out of this world. They're so good.
Yeah, and to that point, I think it is a little bit disappointing that we start at such a high point, and I think it kind of gradually levels out, and it never quite reaches those highs that it starts out with. And I think that just from kind of reading the general consensus on this, I think there's a very distinguished shift in tone, I think, from season 1 and season 2. Season 1 was very grounded. Season 2, I think, very much embraces a lot more of the quote-unquote comic booky elements that the Daredevil character has taken on in a lot of his various runs.
Especially dealing with the villains.
Well, that's exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, Daredevil season 1 alludes to the big bad, if you will, of season 2 and really, honestly, the Netflix universe going forward, which is the Hand. Kind of what loses me a little bit with season 2 is that it works as a setup for an arc going forward, but it doesn't really provide any strong resolution. So it establishes the Hand as this evil organization that Daredevil is opposed to, and they're trying to capture the quote-unquote black sky, which is some sort of weapon that they intend to use. But in terms of realistically what that means, it's not really well conveyed. And again, this is something that obviously I haven't watched properly in a year and a half. But at the same time, even just I think within the, even just at the time, I recall thinking, oh, okay, well, I guess we'll talk about this in the Defenders. And that's not necessarily a problem, but I think for something that, for season 2, that has very strong self-contained arcs, it feels kind of cheap for it to end in a way that that says, hey, come back for, the next season or season 3 or whatever, and you'll get your resolutions then. But that's a quibble. It's a fairly minor quibble. I think what we do get is extremely compelling. And I would say that overall, I enjoy season 2 more than season 1. Although I imagine that, this shift, I mean, you've got freaking undead ninjas running around. I can see where it would lose people. I really could.
Even not for, just like I said, the first 4 episodes, well, you asked me, are you going to rewatch anything from these shows? From all 4 of them? And the one thing I told you is I think I'm going to rewatch the Punisher run. I didn't, but it's the only thing that I think is compelling enough to rewatch, and it's the high point of Netflix Marvel's original series. You know what I mean? It's the high point, and for that, out of everything we're going to cover, it's the biggest thing worth watching. So if you have to invest yourself in season 1, because season 1 laid the groundwork for this to be for everything that's good in season 2 to be good, right? So you have to watch season 1, and not that there's anything wrong with season 1, but to watch season 1 to hit the first 4 episodes of season 2, it's very much worth the investment.
Yeah, 100% agree. And it's that Punisher arc alone for me that really makes season 2 as great as it is, and why I would prefer it over season 1. But before season 2 of Daredevil came out, we briefly mentioned a couple things about it. Marvel's Jessica Jones came out. So this was the kind of the second series in the Marvel and Netflix big mega deal that we talked about. And this is a pretty interesting series. I mean, it's a pretty stark contrast overall from Daredevil. I mean, Daredevil is very much about superheroing, and Jessica Jones, I think, is a much more...
It's a much more internal struggle, though, isn't it? Her struggle with herself is almost the entire arc of the show. Whereas there was a lot of. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's an antagonist for sure, but the majority of the bulk of the show is her dealing with her own problems. And she's got a lot of them.
Yeah, and with good reason. I mean, this is kind of, I think, probably a more resonant show, I think, for a lot of people. Maybe not necessarily for us, but I mean, this is a show that deals with post-traumatic stress disorder, rape, trauma, emotional abuse. I mean, there's a lot of really, really heavy topics that this show tackles all at once. I think from what I can ascertain, it does a really good job of kind of grappling with a lot of these issues and presenting them in a way that handles them respectfully.
Which I think is something that Daredevil didn't necessarily do.
No, and I don't think it's something that it tried to do either.
No, definitely not.
And I think that's a strength of Jessica Jones for me, is that it really did try to kind of, even within the context of this little corner of the universe they've crafted, it really tried to explore some other topics, and it all stems from its antagonist, Kilgrave, the Purple Man, and he's portrayed by David Tennant, and I mean he's quite possibly one of the scariest villains ever created. I mean, I don't want to restrict myself to the television medium, just general. I mean, he's a guy that can say anything, and not only will he make you do it, but will coerce your mind to thinking that you want to do it.
Right, that's a superpower, is persuasion.
And David Tennant, who for most people is probably most recognizable as the 10th Doctor in Doctor Who, where he plays a very, very different character, one who is not absolutely terrifying and is quite likable. This is such a different shade to David Tennant that it almost kind of retroactively, like when you start watching Doctor Who, you like see a clip and you're like, oh, I don't know. Like, I don't know how I feel about this anymore, but but I honestly think that David Tennant delivers the strongest performance overall. I mean, to say this villain, I think, is something that is extremely compelling, and not for the right reasons. He said it's some of the most fucked up things that you'll see in anything, really. But it's a word you used with Daredevil season 2. It's powerful.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I mean, and the way that it really kind of is framed within Jessica Jones' struggle of grappling with the things that she did that he made her do. It is powerful, and it's a show that I think when it deals exclusively with that subject matter, it excels.
Oh, that's very true. Yes. I do think that Jessica Jones has a lot of shortcomings. I think the biggest thing that I can think of is just the repetitive nature of the overall season.
No, I agree. And I think we kind of talked about it a little bit in terms of kind of the pacing for the other shows. I think you mentioned how season 1 of Daredevil dragged a little bit in the middle, and I think this one it really feels like they had maybe 8 episodes of really, really good content, but they had that episode, that 13 episode order, and so they had to kind of stretch their material. And for me, that feels like a missed opportunity, because Jessica Jones is she's a private investigator. She kind of, dabbles in other people's lives. And it's for me, that's kind of a thing that if they needed to fill a few episodes, because they didn't really necessarily have the strongest material for the amount of episodes that they had been given, I think it actually would have been pretty interesting to kind of see just, here's a day in the life of Jessica Jones before Kilgrave rears his ugly head again. I think that would have been something interesting to really explore. And, that's something that, I mean, obviously it's easier said than done. I mean, I'm not the one writing the episodes, On one hand, I understand why they would want to try to do, a full season really kind of contained, but I do agree. I think that it really kind of falls short in the terms of, it really does kind of echo itself time and time again with how it handles these characters. But overall, I really liked Jessica Jones. I mean, I think this is another winner for Netflix.
No, yeah, without a doubt. No, I mean it's a good show. Like I said, it was enjoyable. I really enjoyed Will Simpson. I thought he was a pretty interesting guy. And I really enjoyed her friend Trish Walker. I thought both of those people were pretty cool. It also introduced the next Netflix show, which would be Luke Cage. He was introduced in Jessica Jones.
Yeah. I mean, I that's something that Daredevil really didn't do. Is it really is, and partially due to the nature of it kind of being the first in of its kind. It didn't really introduce any big major characters going forward. But Jessica Jones, I mean, from episode 1, Luke Cage is a player in the game, and I really liked Luke Cage's characterization in this. Mike Colter is the actor that plays Luke Cage, and I think he's great. And honestly, I think the casting in general for this show is great. I particularly enjoy Kristen Ritter as Jessica Jones. I mean, she's kind of got this shitty attitude to everyone,
yeah,
but
she nails it though.
I mean, she's great in it. I enjoy her interactions with basically everyone. She's kind of what you want to say to people, but you have that mental block in your head where you're like, maybe I shouldn't say that. She that the filter's gone. Jessica Jones has no filter, so she just says everything. And I guess I say I did enjoy Trish Walker as a supporting character. Rachel Taylor, the actress that plays Trish, I enjoyed her. I think she was a very good character in a supporting role for Jessica as kind of her best friend.
But I do think that the characters are less fleshed out than Daredevil for sure.
Yeah, and I'll get into spoiler territory here. So I agree. I think in general the supporting cast isn't as strong. Like I said, I do like Trish, and obviously Kilgrave as an antagonist is easily the high point as far as the cast is concerned. But I actually, for like someone like the Will Simpson character portrayed by Will Trevall, kind of seems like it went off the deep end a little too.
I just like the portion where he took the pills and he come unglued.
Well, let's say, I mean, so the Simpson character, there were certain things with his development, he kind of comes in as I guess a love interest for Trish, really.
Right.
And then he kind of just goes off the deep end. He's like, "Oh, I'm ex-military. I'm going to take these pills." And I just remember thinking like, "Oh, that was kind of that just escalated quickly," as far as his character development. And I think that there's just in general, I think Daredevil has a much better supporting cast. Like there's a few bit players in Jessica Jones. Malcolm, her neighbor, I don't know if you remember him. He's like the junkie that she kind of helps cure. And like, he's got kind of a good role for like the first half of the season.
But then he just kind of falls off.
She gets him off the drugs, and then he kind of turns into just like, "Oh, I'm just hanging around because I live next to you," and like he doesn't really have a real role beyond that. It's like they had this arc for him, and then they just said fuck it after that. The same thing with the neighbors, the two weird, possibly incestuous neighbors that live above her.
Yeah, I didn't quite understand that too.
There's just characters that like, these guys are just here to fill time, aren't they? Like they don't add anything. Like if anything, like they really just bring the show down. Daredevil doesn't really have anything like it for me, where I look at it and I think, I don't. What are they going for here?
Everybody that's in Daredevil has a purpose.
Yeah, it's one of the few points in Jessica Jones where I'm like, I just don't know really what they were going for here, and it's not a big deal, but those. For characters that eat up screen time, it's kind of just like, I think this could have been better served elsewhere.
Right. And I think that's where Jessica Jones falters, where Daredevil really stands a cut above, Now, I mean, we could take this opportunity to segue to Luke Cage.
I think that would be good.
I think Luke Cage falters in it's got one strong story arc. So Luke Cage had two very distinctive story arcs, I felt like.
Yeah.
But the second one was pretty. I didn't really connect with the second one. Now the first one I connected very strongly with. We had a very strong antagonist who is Cornell Stokes, also known as Cottonmouth, and then you got Luke Cage, who's the bulletproof man. His skin is unbreakable, and he's got superhuman strength. But Cornell Stokes was fantastic. He was awesome, and I think if I were to write home about anything on Luke Cage, I would write home about Cornell Stokes and the music in the show. Luke Cage's strong point is without a doubt the soundtrack of the show. It's fantastic. It's great. But I kind of didn't explain anything about Luke Cage. If you want to take the opportunity to explain the premise of him.
Yeah, so Luke Cage, this came out in September of 2016, so this is after both Jessica Jones and both seasons of Daredevil. We mentioned briefly that Luke Cage did make his first appearance in the Jessica Jones TV series. So Luke Cage kind of picks up after the events of Jessica Jones, and Luke Cage has relocated to Harlem in New York. He's trying to kind of find himself, I guess.
He's trying to blend.
Right. And it's like you said, he's a guy that his skin's impenetrable. He's got super strength. He's a guy that could make a difference, but he's trying to keep to himself. And the reasons for that very heavily tie into his origin, which is explored a little bit more, well, a lot bit more in this show, kind of in terms of how he got his powers, how he ended up where he was in Jessica Jones, how he ended up where he is now. And that's kind of a spoiler, so I won't get too in depth with that. I mean, there's a literal episode in this show that basically totally goes into, how he became the way he is. And it's kind of just basically, I guess, the central idea of Luke Cage is, he said he's trying to keep to himself, but there's 13 episodes, so at some point Luke Cage has got to step up and do the right thing. And that's kind of where we find Luke Cage in this show, is he's kind of stepping into that hero role. In Jessica Jones, we really didn't see him do much of that. We got to see him super powered, but he wasn't really trying to make a difference for the little guy to really kind of step up and be a hero. And so this is kind of the natural evolution of where we saw him in Jessica Jones, and this is kind of him stepping up.
Right, and that's his struggle. His struggle is do I stand out?
Yeah, and there's I mean, I guess this is somewhat of a spoiler, but he's an ex-convict,
right? And
he's someone that escaped from prison. So it's something where if he sticks his head above the water too high, people are going to kind of figure out who he is. And so that's kind of why he hesitates to act, to really kind of take advantage of what he can do. And yeah, I mean, the whole series, I think, really kind of tackles Luke Cage's motivations. And I think, especially like you were saying, the first arc really does a very effective job of kind of propelling Luke Cage from, I just kind of want to work at a barbershop to really kind of, becoming a hero for Harlem.
And I would say that that it's a refreshing return to Daredevil's the first season of Daredevil, where the villain is, especially for the first arc, the villain is almost one of the most compelling things about this season. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and full credit to Mahershala Ali, who portrays Stokes, aka Cottonmouth. He's been, actually, I think he won an Oscar for Moonlight.
Okay, yeah.
And what he brings to the table in Luke Cage is fantastic. And really, I guess, there's probably a direct comparison you could make him to someone like Wilson Fisk, where this show really takes the time to explore, how he became the way he is. And again, it does it in a way that really kind of humanizes him, especially in comparison to something like Kilgrave. I mean, Kilgrave does get a little bit of characterization in terms of background in Jessica Jones, but he doesn't, he's never humanized. I mean, he's very much, as compelling as it is, he's always a terrible person, and there's no attempt to rationalize that in any sort of meaningful way. Whereas someone like Stokes, Cottonmouth, really does. I mean, you really do kind of see the struggle that even someone like Cottonmouth goes through, and in his attempt to kind of do the things that he does.
Yeah, and full spoiler, but Wilson Fisk, his whole thing is his father struggled to become something, he never became it, and he's going to be and Wilson Fisk is going to be the man that his father never was. Stokes is someone who grew up in a crime family who was pushed into crime. He very much did not. It's not what he started out to be. And as a result of his family environment and everything else, he kind of grew into a character that was not a very good character. And that's what makes him so relatable. He's the person that went down a road that wasn't necessarily his own, and he got pushed down a road that he didn't necessarily want to be on. And then at some point he accepts it, because that's what his family, that's what his family surrounded him with. And it does a very good job of making him a sympathetic character. And then they explore Luke Cage, and Luke Cage is, he's a good character too, not to discredit him at all, but, like I said, the high point of this show for me was definitely Cornell Stokes, in Cottonmouth. He was definitely a very compelling character.
Yeah, and again, full spoilers for Luke Cage here. I guess the big problem with Luke Cage as a show in general, at least as far as season 1 is concerned, is Cottonmouth gets unceremoniously offed in episode 7 by his cousin Mariah Dillard, portrayed by Alfred Woodard. This is like, you can literally mark the point in this show where things really kind of fall off a cliff.
Yeah. For sure.
So basically what happens is Cottonmouth really kind of encompasses, he's the villain for this episode 1 through 7, this big arc. And after he kind of exits stage left, you get another Snake character coming in the form of Diamondback, who is the half brother of Luke Cage. And he's a big arms weapons dealer, and he kind of torments Luke Cage throughout the back half of this show. A lot of this doesn't work for me.
No, it's very unearned. If you want to have another season devoted to him, that's cool. I understand it. Do it. But he comes in after a stellar performance, and he just kind of doesn't do anything with it. He's an unearned character. We're not invested in him in any way. Less than half of the show is about him. You know what I mean? And that's where it ends. It ends with a character that less than half of the show, we before episode 7, I don't think we knew anything about him, did we?
We hear Diamondback mentioned from some of the other characters, but as far as kind of the extent to which he really is involved with Luke Cage's backstory, it's kind of presented as a plot twist here, and it's kind of one of those things, plot twists typically work if you lay the groundwork for it.
Right.
And I don't recall any major groundwork really being laid as far as this, and it's something that, I think they're trying to be resonant with it, emotionally resonant with it, but it doesn't land. They kind of, I think it's too late in the game for them to really kind of start dropping a lot of these big connections.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the show kind of ended when Cornell died. You know what I mean? That's where I kind of it's where I kind of mentally turned myself off. You know what I'm saying? I was so invested in that character, they kill him off, and now we're kind of dragging our feet towards the end of the season. And that's where the show really faltered. Besides the last portion of the show, the first portion is incredible. I think it's great. First portion is. It
kind of sucks because half of a show is amazing, and the half of the show, I don't want to say it's necessarily bad. It's just a significant step down, and it's not good. I wouldn't say it's good. I wouldn't say it's bad. It's kind of somewhere in the middle there, I guess. But half a show does not make a great show.
But they continued that trend to Iron Fist, where it's just, for me, Iron Fist was the most disappointing of all the Netflix shows. And that may have been because I had just seen Doctor Strange just came out a couple months before it came out, and I was ready to see some mystical stuff, and just kind of really fell flat. It didn't really do a whole lot, did it?
No, it did not. Iron Fist. Where do we begin?
You can begin with a little bit of Meacham,
Well, Danny, my name is David Winham. I play Harold Meacham in Iron Fist.
And I think he's the high point of the entire show. I really do. He was great.
Let's go to the beginning, shall we? Iron Fist comes to us from showrunner Scott Buck. Now, Scott Buck likes to fuck. TV shows. So he was, I guess, probably most prominently the showrunner on the latter seasons of Dexter with Michael C. Hall, that, shall we say, were not so well critically received. And he's also the forthcoming showrunner on Marvel's Inhumans, which so far has not been very well received.
Oh no, is he really?
So I think that's probably where the problems begin.
That explains a whole lot.
And I guess it's like the biggest disappointment with Iron Fist is it squanders the concept.
Oh, it could have been so much more, man.
Squandering is an understatement. It fucks up the concept. Like,
yes.
Iron Fist is such a cool character.
So I can give a little bit of backstory to this guy, right? Because I know a little bit about him. I don't know if I know as much as you do, but his family's a very well-to-do family, and they're flying over these mountains in Asia, and the plane goes down. We have little Danny Rand in the mountains alone. Just watch his family just died, and he gets saved by these monks. These monks find him and they take him into this place, this mystical place, and he trains for like 15 or 20 years to be the immortal Iron Fist. He just, day in, day out, he trains to be this ridiculous martial artist. And at one point, he ceremoniously goes into the dragon's den and plunges his fist into this dragon's chest and takes its heart out. And now he can channel his chi through his fist. And by channeling his chi through his fist, he can punch holes through. I mean, he can just punch holes through steel doors. He can create shockwaves. He can do all sorts of crazy things with his Iron Fist. And then he leaves, and he comes to New York, and he can't center his chi anymore. And it just falls so short because Danny Rand is not portrayed as a badass martial artist in the show. Not for a long time. Or it comes and goes, which is also very awkward. The character is just handled awkwardly. I think that's probably the best way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, that's 100% accurate. And it sucks because there's times where I see them trying to convey this Danny Rand character that's, a little bit more lighthearted than kind of what we've seen in these Netflix series. But he's such an inconsistently written character. At one point, he's supposedly the best martial artist in the world. He can defeat Shu Lao the Undying and take his heart and become the immortal Iron Fist. But then there's, he runs into some random security guy and he gets his ass kicked. It's like,
I don't know, man. You were up in heaven fighting dragons and shit. Now you come here, you can't fight the paid security guard? I don't understand. Danny, what's going on?
Yeah, I think it's just such an inconsistently written show. And I don't think it has a great grasp on a lot of its characters. Honestly, like, it's kind of pretty telling that the so-called main character, Danny, the Iron Fist, he's not the most well-developed character. I mean, there's other characters on this show that get more time devoted to them, that get a full arc devoted to them. And that, in that respect, like, that's not so bad. Like, how they handle some of the other characters is fine. But when you're a show called Iron Fist, you should probably focus on the Iron Fist first and foremost before you start dealing with some of these other characters.
And I think the person to write home about in this season 1 is probably Ward. I think Ward's probably the most fleshed out character.
Yeah. Ward Meacham is definitely again, he's probably a prime example of kind of what I just mentioned in terms of here's some of these supporting characters that are somehow given a more full-fledged arc than your main character is.
And Ward is Harold Meacham's son. Harold Meacham is the guy that assumed responsibility for the entire corporation that Danny Rand's father started.
Yeah, he was his partner.
Right.
Yeah, and I think there's not to totally bag on the show. There's things on the show that are fine. I don't think there's anything in the show that's good / great, but there's things in the show that are fine. Ward definitely being a good example, and special shout out to Colleen Wing, another comic book character who I think, for the most part, is handled fairly well. She's kind of she's arguably more badass than the Iron Fist is in his own show, which, on one hand is kind of cool. I really like Jessica Hennick in this show.
I'd tell you another thing to write home about too is the intro sequence. I really liked that beginning of the titles.
Really?
Yeah, it's cool.
This was fine.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty cool, man.
Let's say I feel like we're struggling to talk about this without really getting too mean. Yeah, it's I guess probably what disappoints me most about Iron Fist is it feels like a missed opportunity, and not in more ways than one. Basically, I guess kind of my central issue is, and this is a deliberate choice I think that Scott Buck and company have made, is that they've deliberately made Danny Rand into this character that sucks at being the Iron Fist.
Which, you can't be the Iron Fist and suck at being the Iron Fist.
And it's not so much just that. I think that's part of it, yes. But it basically takes the entire season to acknowledge that fact. I guess we'll get into spoilers here. Who cares? Honestly, if you care about spoilers for this show, don't.
Yeah, right. Let us paraphrase the show.
We both watched all 13 episodes of the show. It's not the worst thing we've ever watched. It really isn't. It has its ups and downs, mostly downs. But
now it might be worth saying that Danny Rand might be a compelling character in the Defenders, because he is such a awesome character. And if that's the case, well, then you got to kind of suffer through watching the Iron Fist.
Yeah, and I think they say, again, this is kind of, they made a deliberate decision to say, hey, this is the beginning of, Danny Rand's journey to becoming the Iron Fist. So basically it takes until episode 10 for them to kind of admit as much as that, okay, he doesn't know what he's doing, which on his own is fine, and I don't have an actual issue with that per se. But when we've spent 10 episodes wasting our time dealing with the utter stupidity of this character and the way he acts, it's incredibly frustrating to watch. And not in the sense of, oh, we really kind of want to get you better. It's just like, why am I watching this show? And part of me is just like, well, I'm a completionist. I like Marvel things. I want to like this. Like, I like Iron Fist as a character. Like, this is something that should be in my wheelhouse. And so it's almost doubly frustrating that it's something that, really kind of fails to do its job. And if they wanted to tell a story about Iron Fist becoming the Iron Fist, I think they needed to start from square one. And I think that's where it really fails, is it basically frames the storyline as Danny Rand comes back to New York. He's already the Iron Fist. It's not earned. It's not earned for him to become the Iron Fist. I mean, literally a character in this show says, "You are the worst Iron Fist ever." Like, it's like the showrunners knew how much they'd really fucked it up. And it's just...
And it would be forgiving. Listen, it'd be forgiving if he can't use his superpowers, as long as he kicked ass when he was using his martial arts. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you can't use your superpower with your Iron Fist, at least you should be able to kick ass with 20 years worth of becoming a ridiculous kung fu guy. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and that's something that could be a strength of this show. I mean, Daredevil's action sequences are phenomenal. Like, they're very well choreographed. They're incredibly badass, and this is a show that should be almost wholly reliant, if nothing else, upon its sequences of action, its choreography, its martial arts, and it totally shits the bed.
It does.
Okay, so I have this here. This is a quote from Fen Jones, who plays Danny Rand. "I was learning the fight sequences 15 minutes before we actually shot them because the schedule was so tight. So 15 minutes before, the stunt director would talk to me through the choreography, and I just jumped straight into it. It really was a baptism of fire, and I just learned on the job, and I've been doing it for 12 months now. With practice, you just get better and better with dealing with that kind of schedule." What? What the fuck?
Yeah, that's not good.
This is a show that
is centered around martial artists.
He's should be one of the most proficient characters at this. And so, they hire someone that doesn't have a background in martial arts, which at least probably could have concealed the fact that they didn't actually know what they were doing when they were filming it. But they literally barely knew what the fuck they were doing when they were filming it. And it shows. It totally shows. Like, there's so many sequences in this that I'm just like, oh, no, this is poorly shot. It's poorly edited. You've got fucking 200 cuts for like a 1-minute sequence because they clearly had to dance around the fact that they didn't actually know what they were doing. And I don't mean to totally criticize Finn Jones here. I mean, he's an actor. He goes for a role. If he gets cast, he's not going to tell him, oh no, I'm not the most equipped to do this role. I mean, the burden is on Marvel, Netflix, Scott Buck, and whoever else, the casting director, to say that, if we're not well prepared for this show to do full martial arts effects, maybe we should hire someone that has at least has a background in that.
Correct. Right.
To kind of help that. Or the obvious choice would to be use some stuntmen. Now, is it easier to conceal a stuntman if they're wearing a mask? What a concept.
Right.
So Iron Fist has a costume in the comics.
But not here.
Why? Why does he not have a costume? And we didn't actually talk about it for Daredevil. I mean, Daredevil starts in this kind of, low budget black getup before he gets a full-fledged armored outfit.
And he gets it out of necessity. And Iron Fist is a character that should be doing this out of necessity. He's a billionaire whose face is totally recognizable. That's true. Even the older Iron, in Iron Fist lore, if you will, Danny Rand is not the first Iron Fist.
Right.
And all of the previous Iron Fist they all have the same costume. It's like something that's dawned on you upon completing the challenge of, defeating the dragon. At least I think. I mean, it's what I kind of got those vibes because every single Iron Fist throughout history has the same look. In which case, why didn't he come back from heaven with his Iron Fist costume?
I know, and it doesn't have to be exactly written that way.
No.
But within the show, we see a costumed Iron Fist. So, Danny Rand sees this footage of a guy running around in full Iron Fist garb, kicking ass. As he's got two glowing Iron Fists. So this guy clearly knows what he is doing, and it's just like, why are we not watching that show?
And to be fair, they framed it under the thing, hey, listen, he wanted to go back home and he didn't do his training. But he can't even do martial arts. He can't even do martial arts against the security guard.
It just begs the question, how is this like what they ended up with? Like, of all the things that they could have adapted from the comics, hell, if they wanted to do their own thing and just took loose inspiration, like, of all the things that they could have ended up on, like, how is this the adaptation that we got? So again, another thing I have here is, so for a while there were some rumors that Marvel TV was having a difficult time balancing Iron Fist's mystical elements with the kind of grounded world that the Netflix universe has established, and that they were possibly contemplating canceling the show. And, they kind of vehemently denied this for the longest time. But honestly, I watched this show and I kind of think, oh no, they just crapped this out last minute. Like they had an agreement with Netflix, like this show had to be made. It wasn't a case of, well, we don't have the right idea, let's not go through it. I think it was a case of, we're contractually obligated to make this show.
Which should be fine. If you want to adapt a character to be more grounded, that's understandable. Make him a badass warrior monk. You know what I'm saying? Like, and you can just implement it. Okay, you got a guy that's bulletproof that can, he's pretty ungrounded, right? So why don't you just make this badass warrior monk who can punch really hard or whatever? You know what I mean? Like, you can expand on the ideas of this character,
I'd say on one hand, I agree. You could alter the character to fit the universe a little bit better if that's what they were really kind of having struggles with. But on the other hand, I say no. You either do this character properly or you don't do it all. It's kind of how I feel about it. I mean, we've gotten half-assed variations of comic book characters in the past, and this is a half measure. I mean, whether it's budgetary restrictions that they had, time restrictions, obviously Finn Jones learning his fighting choreography was very much a time restriction, but this needed some more time in the this needed a little bit more time in development, I think.
And I don't mean to be superficial, but Finn Jones just doesn't look like somebody that kicks so much ass. You know what I'm saying?
I think that I'd say, I honestly don't mind Finn Jones. I don't think he would have been my first choice. I don't think he would probably have been in my top 10 choices for this role. But that said, I think that for what he was given, overall, he did an okay job with. He didn't elevate it by any measure, but I don't think he was actively bad in kind of what the material that he was given. And he's very scrawny. And, obviously I'm not exactly the most muscular person myself, but yeah, it's hard to buy this character and part of it is because literally they just didn't give him enough time to bulk up. I mean, you look at freaking Chris Pratt, you look at Paul Rudd, for Christ's sake, and in the movies, and these guys are suddenly showing up to their Marvel movies with freaking 8-packs, and it's just kind of like, it seems like Finn Jones was the one guy that didn't have enough time to go on the Marvel diet, if you will.
He just was dealt a short hand, man.
I think it's unfair to really criticize the cast, because I think for what they were given, I think they did about as good of a job as they possibly could do. And some of them actually did do a fair job of it. And I think the guy that plays Ward did a pretty good job with what he was given, but he was probably also given the strongest material overall, and that's just a separate issue entirely. And then, of course, there is the case of David Wenham. You just got to center your chi, Danny.
Well, he centered his shit whenever he played that guy. That guy was pretty good, man.
You gotta take care of the hand for me, Danny. They're after me.
And you gotta eat your ice cream, Danny.
You've got to eat your ice cream. I've got some cinnamon wheat ice cream for you.
Oh, that guy's batshit. It's just a weak show. By far the weakest.
Okay, that's a interesting point to bring up. I would like you to rank for me the Marvel Netflix shows in order, and you can lump Daredevil seasons 1 and 2 together for sake of simplicity.
Okay. I would say Daredevil, number 1, Luke Cage, number 2, Jessica Jones, number 3, and Iron Fist on a far 4.
All right. I see you. I'm going to switch it up a little bit. I'm going to go number 1, Iron Fist. Wait, hold on.
Something's wrong.
Hold on. What? Oh, okay, hold on. My $1 million paycheck from Scott Buck has not cleared, so Iron Fist will no longer be number 1. No, Daredevil's got to be number 1, 100%. I would actually put Jessica Jones number 2. I think it has the strongest material, even if it is stretched out the most. And number 3 would be Luke Cage for me. Half of an amazing show, half of a not so good one. I think overall, you kind of weigh the averages. I think Jessica Jones slightly edges it. I wouldn't disagree with you. I just personally, if I was going to rank them, I would put Jessica Jones above Luke Cage, and then sitting in like number 10 is Iron Fist. The 4 through 9 slots are TBD right now.
The reason I like Luke Cage as much as I do is Cottonmouth was the way it was shot. I thought it was shot awesome. I didn't think that Jessica Jones had any sort of and it's been a while, but any sort of noteworthy shots that I can think of. I think the cinematography was much more artful and tasteful in Luke Cage. I thought that the soundtrack was better in Luke Cage. And the first 7 episodes were very well crafted. And for those reasons, I thought it was more robust through episodes 1 through 7 than Jessica Jones. Now, what Jessica Jones did do, and it did it very well, was conquer its material, conquer the things that could have been they're just high pressure point topics. You know what I mean? And it did a very good job of doing that stuff very effectively. But I thought that Luke Cage was more robust and more tasteful in what it did through episodes 1 through 7. Now, if it was just a season of 7 through 13 on Luke Cage, then it would be much closer to old Danny Rand. But episodes 1 through 7 were very strong, I thought.
Well, I guess we'll just have to agree to disagree on that.
That's it.
Although we basically agree. I mean, there's really not much disagreement here. We're actually basically on the same wavelength as far as he's concerned. I guess that takes care of our Marvel Netflix roundup. So next Friday, which I believe is the 18th of August, Marvel's The Defenders will be dropping, and that'll be the team up of all of them, and we'll be sure to dive deep a little bit further on that once it comes out, once we get a chance to check it out. Until then, is there anything else you've been watching lately? Or reading?
Let me, I want to tell you a couple things, and I was actually very excited to go over these couple things, because I've experienced some good things this past week.
Well, I'm excited now.
Yeah. I can tell you that season 3 of Voltron, that was the first thing I finished up this week.
Okay.
Season 3 of Voltron really stepped it up on episode, I want to say episode 3 or episode 4. I can't really remember what episode it was, but it got stronger as it went along, and I'm not going to tell you it's the best thing to watch, because it certainly isn't, but if you're invested and you haven't watched Season 3 yet, get through the first couple episodes. They're kind of mediocre, but then it really steps it up on episodes 3 or 4 and up until the end of the season. Thought it did a good job. I started watching Mr. Robot. I'm about halfway through that. Episodes 1 through 3 were like nothing to write home about. But season 4 up until season 7, because that's as far as I'm at right now. I think I'm on episode 7 or 8. Were incredibly strong. And I'm very happy to start rewatching that, or not rewatching it, but get back into season 2, because it's fantastic. It's really good. And I think that it's a good segue into the other thing that I started this week, which was I started playing Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice, and it's kind of got similar tropes. I think this week for me has been Mental Illness Week, which I don't know what that says about myself, but Hellblade is incredible. If you're looking for a game to play, it's probably one of the most, I'm not going to tell you it's the most cinematic game I've played, but it's definitely done some very different things with how it executes its material. It deals a lot with mental illness and schizophrenia and that sort of stuff, and it does it in an excellent way. If you do play the game, I recommend you play it with headphones. It uses binaural audio, which, if you don't know what that is, it's almost like they record speech with, the sound transfers all around you. It's almost like surround sound, but, very close to your head. And when you put your headphones on, it definitely sounds like something's directly behind you, or directly in your left ear, your right ear, or in front of you. And they use this in a sense to demonstrate the different voices that Senua has in her head. And throughout playing, the game is very dark and very intense. And as you're walking around through the forest or walking around in these different environments, you're constantly, throughout the entire game, you have these voices pounding away in your head. It's very unsettling. And then they also the art style, it lends a lot to the art style as well. The execution of off-putting you a little bit. You'll be walking through the forest, and then you'll see these moving white things, and you can't really tell what they are. You get right up on them, and they're actually eyes, like in the forest, looking at you. So and it's subtle enough to where you don't really notice it unless you really get up on it and look. But that coupled with just the general activities and what you're doing in the game, and the voices in your head, it's just incredible. It's very good. I highly, highly, highly recommend anybody listening, play that game if you have the ability to play it, because it's, like I said, it's probably one of the best games that I've played this year, if not the best. It's very good. That in a nutshell. Not to dump on you, but in a nutshell, that's what I've done this week, and everything that I've experienced this week has been very good, unlike Danny Rand.
You don't like Danny Rand, huh?
What about you, man? What you been up to?
Well, I'm glad you took my recommendation to watch Mr. Robot Season 2. I haven't been watching Mr. Robot Season 2, but I have been watching a little bit of Game of Thrones. So I haven't watched episode 5, which was the most recent episode to come out, but I did watch episode 4, The Spoils of War. And there's a particular sequence in that which blew my mind.
Oh, wow.
Mild spoilers for Game of Thrones. I think that most people tend to spoil it the day after on Facebook anyway, so this is old news. It's a week old at this point. So there's a sequence where one of Daenerys' dragons attacks a train full of Lannister soldiers carrying goods back to King's Landing, and let's just say that the dragon gets to breathe some fire.
Oh, yeah?
And it's one of the most phenomenal sequences, A, I've seen in a long time, and B, on television, it's probably one of the most impressive sequences I've ever seen in my life.
When it breathes fire?
Well, it's a little bit more extensive than that. It absolutely wrecks shop. This is kind of what we've been waiting for with Game of Thrones, is to see the dragons really kind of go full dragon.
I gotcha. You get to see why they're so menacing.
Yeah, I mean, and it does such a perfect job of it. I mean, so it's kind of one of the few instances where we've seen principal characters kind of on opposite sides of the battle. So we've got Daenerys and her dragon versus Jaime Lannister and the army, the Lannister army, the Queen's army at this point. And it's incredible. I mean, the CGI effects alone are preposterous for TV. I mean, yeah, HBO is obviously throwing millions of dollars at this show at this point, and why wouldn't they? But it's incredibly impressive, mixed with the practical effects. There's a HBO behind the scenes look at it. It's about 15 minutes long. Honestly, if you don't give a flying fuck about Game of Thrones, it's still worth watching just to watch the technicality behind this impressive work. I mean, it's a lot of, they got the demolitions rigs set up for the explosions, and then, they have the dragon, Compton CG overhead with the fire that syncs with the explosions as they go off. They have literal, I think the most people ever in a single shot on fire, literally stuntmen on fire. It's fantastic. So I'm ranting and raving about it because it still sticks in my mind as kind of one of the most amazing things. I mean, I was literally, raising my arms in awe, bowing down to Queen Daenerys. She's not queen yet, but holy shit, she deserves to be. Oh, man. That was fantastic. And speaking of HBO, I also rewatched Westworld.
That's a show worth mentioning, isn't it?
It sure is. And it is definitely a show that rewards rewatching. It's a very intricately plotted, intricately told storyline, and I would definitely recommend it. And I mean, it's fortuitous for HBO. Obviously, Game of Thrones is kind of winding down. It's got the end of this season and then 6 episodes for a season 8 / season 7.5, depending on kind of how you look at it. And I think Westworld has really taken shape as kind of the de facto replacement for that tentpole show that HBO really kind of needs to anchor its lineup, and deservedly so. I mean, Westworld is very well done. It's from Jonathan Nolan, brother of Christopher Nolan, director of Dunkirk, Inception, Batman Begins, Dark Knight Rises, among other things, and his wife Lisa Joy. And the acting in it is masterclass. Anthony Hopkins not phoning it in for the first time in a few years, which is amazing. Jeffrey Wright is powerhouse. Evan Rachel Wood is fantastic. Tandy Newton. It's well worth checking out.
If you don't know what Westworld is, it's about androids, and for somebody to play an android that can turn on and turn off emotion, that says an incredible amount about the people acting in it, I think. I mean, in order for you to just display just especially with this show, because at certain points they have these androids do what do they call them? They call them micro movements or something like that. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, micro expressions.
Yeah, micro expressions. That's it. And for an actor just to on demand do something like that, it displays an incredible amount of control on just your expression, and it says a lot about the people portraying the robots. Oh, it's such a great show. It's so good.
And to kind of latch on that, I guess, I should kind of explain it a little bit more for anyone that might be mildly interested in it. It takes place principally in a theme park, and potentially in the near future. It's not really clearly explained, but a bunch of rich people, if they have enough money, can go to this theme park that features these lifelike people, artificial intelligence that are, characters in this Western society. It takes place in kind of like the wild, wild West. And basically kind of, I guess, the idea is, you pay enough money, you can go in there, you can do whatever you want, you can kill anyone you want, you can fuck anyone you want, and that's it. You pretty much craft your own tale. It's like a real life video game, I guess, but, it's a little bit different when you're literally there kind of doing whatever you want. Everyone looks perfectly lifelike. So it's a fascinating story, and kind of where it goes by the end of this season is extremely fascinating. I think season 2 is filming now with a release date sometime next year, and I'm obviously looking forward to kind of where it goes with season 2. But it's honestly, it's a show, kind of like I briefly said, that there's so much to it that even a rewatch rewards you. Like it's a very rewatchable show. There's just so many little details and stuff that you can pick out of it here and there that really make really make it worth an experience.
Yeah, I think when season 2 comes out, I'll probably dive into the season 1. I'll rewatch it and get prepped for it.
Yeah, and like I said, I think that's something that kind of when season 2 comes out, we can maybe do a little bit of a deeper dive if we have time for it,
sure.
And go from there.
That's it, man. I'm gonna finish Senua's Sacrifice. I'm gonna finish Mr. Robot, and I need to finish my audiobooks. So that's probably what I'll be diving into this next week.
Good deal. I mean, I actually, I might actually start watching some of the shows we just talked about. And the Defenders, like I said, is coming up very soon. I might end up revisiting maybe just a handful of episodes from
Danny Rand.
Probably not Danny Rand. I think I've seen enough Danny Rand for a while, at least enough until I see him again in Defenders, which hopefully does revive his character, bring him back to kind of where we want him to be. But yeah, anything else you want to talk about? You ready to wrap this bad boy up?
Let's wrap it up, man.
All right. So I guess we kind of talked about it a little earlier, but I mean, honestly, for anyone that is listened to us last week, we really don't care when you jump in. Thank you so much. Your support is what makes us come back and want to do this and inspires us to watch movies, to watch these TV shows and keep going. And it's awesome to see response. Going into this, we didn't really know what kind of life it would take. So it's very, very gratifying to kind of see the response that we've gotten so far, and to anyone that has engaged with us through just talking to us personally, Facebook, whatever the case may be. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Credits to Kevin MacLeod for our intro and outro tracks called Mechanolith, licensed under the Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0 license. We are available at www.watchreviewrepeat.com. At there, you will find links to our iTunes storefront, Google Play Music storefront, any other helpful links. If you want to listen to us through the phone, if you want to listen to us through the website, that's available to do there. If you want to listen to us to the Facebook video, you'll see that there. We're also available on YouTube, so there's tons of ways to listen to us. We don't care how you do it. We just are greatly appreciative of the fact that you want to listen to us, and that's enough for us. We have a Gmail account. It's watchreviewrepeat@gmail.com. If you want to send us anything there, any feedback, comments, anything like that, you're welcome to do that there. You can also do it through our Facebook or our Twitter account, which is at WRRPod. I'd say that's probably about it for this week. Next week, we'll be talking Marvel's The Defenders in its entirety, all spoilers and all. Andrew, you got anything else you want to add?
No, that's it. Just thanks for listening. Come back next week for a thorough review of The Defenders.
Alrighty, we'll leave you at that, and
have a good night.